do you have any problems juggling scale of our drawing and the amount of detail we need to put into it? Now, scale is referring to the relative proportions of something that we're drawing compared to the original. And we could keep the scale the same if we draw it the same size, or we could change the scale and make a drawing proportionately different in size. It may be larger or smaller than our reference. And we may do this intentionally, or it may just end up that way if we start drawing our first parts of the drawing larger than our reference. But keeping scale consistent can be a big issue. And even when we draw the same size as I am here, or trying to draw the same size, getting the scale consistent can be difficult, because when it's a fairly finely detailed subject, then even the thickness of our pen line can influence visually what we see and what we're drawing. We have to allow for the thickness of the pen line without actually making our shapes that we're drawing wider. And sometimes the sheer thickness of our line, even when it's not a thick line, as in this 0.2 millimeter line, means that we just can't draw all the detail that we can see, because there's simply not enough width on our paper for the number of lines we need to put in for what we're drawing. So that means that often when we're drawing something that's fairly finely detailed, such as this tower in Sheffield in England, we have to make allowance for the fact that we're not going to be able to be as precise in the amount of detail that we draw. Now, this is not a straightforward tower. It looks relatively simple, but the nature of the detail, I think, keeps us on our toes. Certainly, very careful observation is needed. And in my preliminary mark making exercise, where I just explore some of the things that I think may be a problem, on my first take of this, I went too wide. And so keeping the proportions of this tower, keeping the scale of the tower is important, even as we draw the details. Because a lot of the areas that we're defining are actually very thin in the actual tower. It has a very visually slender feel to it. And we don't therefore want to make our tower too chunky looking. Already watching this now for a second time, it's even clearer to me that some of my widths are too wide, such as the widths on the upper part of the tower where the edges curve in. I also struggled to get all of the height observed and drawn carefully in this section I'm doing now. You'll notice it's a bit of a mess. Fortunately, it's not, I don't think, particularly apparent at the end. But again, it's important that we get that extra height there, even with the risk of extra lines, because if we don't, that will change the overall proportion, the overall scale of the tower, because parts of it won't be proportioned the correct way. And then we have this small dome on top. Just a little bit over full on the dome there. It looks slightly inflated, doesn't it? Curving underneath. But never mind, not looking quite so obvious now. And now this is where juggling detail and scale has some issues, because I don't really have enough room. Haven't really made that center section wide enough, because I've made the framing sections on each side of it slightly too wide. And therefore I need to make some compromises in putting in that archway. And there isn't really room for the detail, but probably on the scale anyway, there really wasn't room with this pen to draw that detail, even if I'd had a little more width. And now I have these long inset windows. And there is some detail here of these faces, which I must admit I did intend to put a bit more detail on, and I just forgot, because I got to this stage and I thought I'd put this band in where the brickwork ends and the stonework begins, because I think it's a significant part of the visual effect of this tower. And then I thought, well, look, I've drawn this now at 15 minutes real time. It took me to draw the tower, and this was all I was going to do. But I actually really like the form of this tower, even though I just quickly grabbed this photo in a car driving past. And I decided to grab my markers and just to quickly see if I could capture the effect of the colour and the shadows a little bit more. So I'm using my Copic sketch markers. I used an N1 for the first colour, and then I used an N2, for the first value I put on. Then I used an N4 for the darker tones, and now I've got an N1 which I'm using for the shadows on the lighter stonework. And so what I'm trying to do is keep the relative values the same. As I said, I wasn't planning to use tone on this. I was going to stop at just the line work, but it was really just a few minutes work, and it made it just a bit more useful as an exercise. And so having done that, I'm thinking, well, look, I may as well give some context to my tower now, because it's just standing in space. So again, although I had planned just to stop at that 15-minute mark with just the line drawing done, I've decided to add some further details. So I start this tree on the left-hand side, which actually becomes the closest part of the scene to us. I do this roofing that's in front. I don't do it particularly well observed on the left-hand side. And then I decide I will put these two lamps in. I'm going to come very close to running out of paper on the right-hand side, because I hadn't originally planned to do this. But I decided to put those lamps in because I think they're a nice contrast to the tree. And again, because they come forward, they do add now a depth of plane to this, so that we're looking through the space between the closer tree and then the lampposts a little further back, then the building that's behind all of them, and then we have our tower behind. And then we're going to have just a few indications of the buildings behind that as well. So I probably came close to doubling the time I spent drawing this. It I think in the end was 28 minutes. 15 minutes for what I envisaged as the daily exercise. So how much you want to draw yourself of this is just up to you, of course. Now I'm using an N5, which is the darkest value I used just for the two lampposts. And then there's just a bit more detail to do with this pine tree that's in front of one lamp and behind the other. trying to keep the scale correct is always a challenge, and particularly when we have fine detail. It's often the thickness of our line which causes the problem. So we have to make choices what details we include and what details we don't include, which ones we simplify, so that our overall width or our height, depending where the detail is, whether it's arranged primarily vertically or horizontally, how it sits, so that we can fit all the detail we need to fit in and keep it in scale. And looking at this again, the top of my tower is just a little bit too high. The section under the dome rises up just a bit high, I think. I hope you have a go at this, and of course you will find the reference photo on my channel community page. And I decided to add a few more leaves a bit further down. And then we just have a few more leaves. There's always a few more leaves when we draw trees. And I think we're pretty much done at that point. I did draw this tower once before in a video where I drew 3 different towers for a video on drawing towers. But hey, what do you think? G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this helpful, at least interesting. I hope you have a go drawing it, because it's not straightforward. So it will challenge you and push you in some areas, I'm sure. And that's how we learn, by pushing ourselves in reasonable and measured ways. But look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, whether you're pushing yourself or whether you're coasting downhill with it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.